Good evening, everyone. My name is Laurie Cardinal. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Learning Services for Star Catholic. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Mental health and wellness for our students and your children is becoming increasingly important, especially in light of what has been happening during COVID. The pandemic has put a stress on our kids, and we really do need to know how to support them. Staff have been trained in mental health literacy, and we want parents to walk along the journey with us so we all can work together to support our students. And that's what tonight is about supporting our kids. And just a note, today is Bell Let's Talk Day. So Bell will donate more towards mental health initiatives in Canada by contributing 5 cents for every applicable text, call, tweet, or TikTok video using hashtag Bell Let's Talk. So take a snapshot and make sure to put up the hashtag Bell Let's Talk. So again, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Claire Ganton for prayer.
Please join me in the sign of our faith. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, we pray for our children growing up in a beautiful but sometimes unsteady world. Help us to show them that your ways give more life than the ways of the world, and that following you is the path to true joy. Help them take any struggle or failure not as a measure of their worth, but as a chance for a fresh start. Give them strength to hold their faith in you and to keep alive their joy in your creation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to take a moment now to just acknowledge the land on which we gather and to honor it. Please join me. We are a party to Treaty 6, and as such, we wish to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground for many Indigenous peoples. We recognize the diversity of First Nations who have at one time lived across the territory, as well as the presence of the Métis Nation.
Oh, my apologies, Chris.
So we would just like to introduce the Star Catholic support team that we have here at Central Office. Myself is Chris Pirro. I'm Director of Student Services.
I'm Michelle Horbe. I'm the Division Wellness Coordinator.
I'm Claire Ganton. I'm our Director of Faith Life and Religious Education.
And I'd like to introduce Kathy Jarrell. She's joining us through the Alberta School Mental Health Literacy Project, which she had joined in 2019. She's been with Alberta Health Services in a mental health capacity building role since 2013, serving as an education consultant and clinical consultant to support rural educators, physicians, clinicians, and other direct service providers in their work with children and youth. In her work at Mount Royal University, Kathy served as a subject matter expert for the Children's Mental Health Certificate Program and has taught clinical courses primarily in the social work program. Within AHS, Kathy has partnered with the Provincial Mental Health Promotion and Injury Prevention Team to deliver training in disaster preparedness, including facilitating school-based psychological first aid. In addition, Kathy continues to provide counseling in private practice. And today, Kathy's going to focus on what we say and the words that we use about mental health, because it matters. And Kathy Jarrell is going to talk about that today and relate it to the experiences and challenges we've experienced during the pandemic. So thank you, Kathy.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Laurie. And I have to say, my colleague Andrew Baxter and I really enjoyed coming and working with the Star Catholic leadership team and all of your staff in doing core training a number of years ago. When we originally planned this, I was hoping to come join you in person, but alas, the COVID pandemic had other plans for us. So I'll just share my screen here. which worked really easily before. There we go. Is that looking okay? Good. So yes, let's talk about mental health. Words matter. And so this will be an overview of what staff have learned that have been connected with Star Catholic, as well as what many of the students are learning in their classes, taking some of the curriculum. That doesn't sound very exciting. I hope the next 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes or so, that you'll find some takeaways and some value. So I take my work seriously. I don't take myself too seriously. And so I will, add a little bit of humor, I hope, to the presentation. So my TikTok skills are not good. I will not be submitting a TikTok video for Bell Let's Talk, but I have got the Wordle going. And so many of you may have heard about this game, or maybe like me, you've ventured into it. So when we're talking about words and Wordle, this won't be a real Wordle, but I'm just going to play with the concept a little bit to talk about how words matter. So there's lots of pandemic headlines about concern about the mental health of our kids, of our teens, and certainly it's been a long, grueling number of years. And so I don't want to minimize how challenging it has been for so many of us, but I do think we need to kind of know what we're dealing with. So some people are saying there's a pandemic of mental illness, that is as big of a concern as the physical health risks for young people. So what are we dealing with? And I would suggest to you that even before the pandemic, and once the pandemic has gotten back to, has minimized, we're still going to have mental health concerns out there for sure. And so there's lots of headlines. Cosmopolitan magazine will say, eat avocados for anxiety. Really? Is there depression at night? Is that a specific kind of category? So there's lots of messages coming at us all the time about our wellness and lots of advice. And of course, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry around wellness. If there's a need, somebody's going to try to market it and sell something to us. So how can we cut through the fray of all of the information? That's what we talk about a lot in mental health literacy. So I have to say too, even in publications, even within Alberta Health Services, there's lots of confusion around the terms that we use. We talk about a mental health issue. We use the term mental health when we're sometimes meaning something else, right? We're not really talking about mental health. We're talking about a mental illness or a mental disorder. So there's such confusion around there. And here's the problem. How do we do anything, even like a survey to students about how they're doing, if we're so confused about the language? Do you have anxiety, or do you just have a normal kind of stress response that would be expected? Are you depressed? Are you really sad and disappointed that you're not able to do the usual sports that you're participating in? So I hope that you will leave after this session this evening having some more clarity around the importance of the words that we use and some shared agreement when we use the words. So for example, a mental health issue, we say that because, maybe that's something that's, kind of a generalized term. And sometimes I catch myself saying that as well. But a child in the grocery store might be having a mental health issue when they're having, a meltdown for not getting the candy that they want. We also use that term mental health issue for someone with schizophrenia who's having a psychotic break. And I think you'd agree those are very different things. So that language is very unclear. So what we need to do is clear up the language and sing from the same song sheet. So when we're talking about concerns, we can share that understanding. So what we use, this comes from Dr. Stan Kuchar from teenmentalhealth.org, and all of this intellectual property was gifted to mental health literacy within Alberta Health Services. So we call this the pyramid of mental states. The idea of this is that we exist in different areas along this pyramid. It's different states where we exist. It's bigger at the bottom than at the top, because hopefully we spend more time at the bottom than at the top. And so I'll just walk through that with you around how we language our different states of how we exist so that there's some more clarity with that. So again, there might be some times where maybe we're not super happy, but we're just okay. That's the bottom part where we would say that we have no distress. The next part is what we would call mental distress or stress. And of course, you know, stress has been given such a bad name, whereas really stress is a part of life. You know, going through a hallway for grade 8 would be a stressful experience, even for me now, right? There's stresses in our lives. And here's the thing, it matters about how we think about it and how we approach the stresses that we have, because that kind of stress reaction can motivate us. I was a little bit stressed getting ready for this presentation today, and I hope that that will give me some energy to do my best to deliver information for you. Right? So we stress a muscle to make it stronger. It's not a bad thing. In fact, if we had no stress, we'd maybe not get up in the morning, right? So we can't vilify stress. And Kelly McGonigal has a YouTube video that's worth checking out about how to make stress your friend, because even how we think about stress makes a difference physiologically around how we experience it. So it's really important that we share this information with our children and youth, and even check our own thinking about how we consider stress, because it can really help us with our problem-solving skills. We're going to talk about that more in this presentation because it's so important. But moving on, what we call a mental health problem is a problem impacting our mental health. So it's not a mental illness or disorder that gets diagnosed. Rather, it's a large environmental factor, something that happens in our lives that for a time really knocks our socks off, impacts our ability to function. So an example of that might be grief. If we're grieving the loss of a loved one, that's not a mental illness. That's our state of being that is grieving. Right? Or it could be moving to a new country without sufficient supports. It could be losing a job. A large environmental factor impacting us. Yes, it could be the pandemic that for us is a mental health problem that really is affecting our mojo, impacting our usual functioning. And so when someone has a mental health problem, what we need is supports, right? Sharing with someone else. Sometimes practical supports help. Sometimes talking to a counselor. So in my role as a counselor, I talk to lots of people who are experiencing a mental health problem, loss of a relationship, those kinds of things, right? So we need all kinds of support, but we may not need medication, for example. And then the last category that we're going to talk about is a mental disorder or illness. And here's where there's so much confusion, because a mental disorder or illness is like some other kind of health condition. So the brain is part of the body. It's part of our, it's an important organ, right? And sometimes something goes wrong. The fancy term of it is there could be a perturbation in brain function, a disruption, a hiccup, if you will. And who knows what causes that? There's a confluence of different things that may happen. It may be no environmental factor. It may be just something that goes awry. And the important thing is that if that is properly diagnosed and treated, then that makes a big difference. Just as, let's say, someone has arthritis or diabetes, makes a big difference if it is properly diagnosed and treated with the best available medication and other kinds of treatment that there are. So really important to differentiate this, because if we don't know what we're talking about, we say we have a mental health issue, where does that fit in there? Let's be more precise with our languaging. That is a really helpful thing, because there's different kinds of responses and different kind of words that we use for the different types of where we're at, different mental states. So along the side, notice mental health. The important thing is to know what mental health is and isn't. So mental health is the condition that we have. We all have mental health, and that is our ability to meet the demands of life. So the World Health Organization has a definition for that, and it's about being able to manage the slings and arrows of life, right? So here's the thing. If we have a mental illness, we don't lose our mental health, right? We just like if you have I don't know. If you have an injury, you don't lose your physical health. You just have something else to deal with. And many people with a mental disorder or a mental illness may have better mental health than someone who doesn't, because they've learned really good strategies and they have it treated and it's well under control. So really important that we understand these different ways of terming this. So another important note to make is that we can be in all of these states at the same time. So let's say a grade 10 student with ADHD, it's considered a mental disorder, has a mental health problem because he's broken up with his girlfriend and he's quite devastated. And he may have some mental distress because he has a big exam he needs to study for. And other times he's playing a video game with a friend and forgetting about all that and doing just fine, right? Someone with schizophrenia, a mental illness, may have a mental health problem if they're evicted from their apartment. And they may have some mental distress because they're having an argument with their sister, and other times they're doing just fine. So it's important that we understand this and know what we're talking about. Now, the point is not to be going around diagnosing people, but the point is to kind of understand and have some good discussions around the words that fit for this. So students pick this up really fast. And they also understand the problem with saying that if they want a neat desk, that doesn't mean that they're OCD. Or if they're really disappointed because they didn't make a sports team, maybe they're not depressed, but they could be really disappointed. And so we can model the importance of using the right words. The other thing is, if we use the right words for how we're feeling, that in itself is really important with our coping and functioning. So when we talk about mental health literacy, the important thing about that is the more that we know about something and speak clearly and knowledgeably about it, that we manage a health condition better. So there's lots of studies out there. For example, I remember reading one around people with having to go for open heart surgery. The more they knew about what to expect, the better they did. Same with mental health. And so what are the components of mental health literacy? Do we understand about how to obtain and maintain good mental health? Do we have a good understanding of the disorders? Again, this evening in this overview presentation, we can't go into the various disorders in any great detail, but there's good, but I can point you to good information to learn more. If we can reduce stigma, that is really key, because that will really stop a lot of people from even talking about this, which I think is the gift of Bell Let's Talk about mental health literacy. But I hope you agree with me that we need to talk knowledgeably about it, because I could talk about astrophysics, but I wouldn't have anything very knowledgeable to say about it. So we need to increase our literacy level to know what we're talking about. And importantly, do we know how to get help? Do we know when, here's some signs that maybe I do need some support with this? Do we know how to navigate that, where to go for help? So all of this is so foundational, and the points of efforts around health promotion, around prevention, and even treatment and care rests atop that. So again, I told you already that I'm not much into TikTok, but Wordle, yes. So again, words matter. And what I want to talk about next is facts matter, or evidence, but facts fit in better for the 5-letter word. And if you want to guess again about what the next terms are coming up, there's these little hints and letters for you. Of course, the real Wordle people out there will know that this isn't really following a true Wordle. So facts, what do I mean by facts? Good evidence. So for example, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, looks at windows of onset for various major mental disorders. And you will see some of them have a longer window of onset when they appear for someone, and some shorter. But I think it's really key to note that the window of onset for 70% of all mental disorders occur between the ages of 12 and 25. So that is such a key time. That is why our team with Alberta Health Services spends time educating school personnel so that they're able to be more in tune with what might be happening for young people and are able to identify young people who may need more assessment. So it's just such a key part, a key time frame. It's a key time frame when, you know, there's so much development for the brain, right? Used to be the thought that, oh, you know, young people are pretty much, you know, surpassing us in height, and their brain must be pretty well developed at the same time. Turns out, well into the 20s, even to their 30s, there's major synaptic growth happening, major neural development that's happening. I like this quote. Adolescence, a period of rapid changes between the ages of 12 and 17. A parent can age as much as 20 years. Any of you out there relate? My children are in their early 20s now, and that quote kind of resonates. So this is a complicated looking slide to talk about why does one person develop a mental illness and another person doesn't? The short answer is we don't know. And if anyone tells you too assuredly that they have all the answers, you need to be suspicious of that. But in brief, it's a complex interaction between environmental influences and genetics. So some conditions have more of a close family, genetic connection than others. But truly, it is a complicated thing. You know, there could be identical twins, and one could develop a mental illness and one may not. So there's lots that we don't know. In fact, there's a quote around the journey to understand the brain. If it's a mile long, we've gone an inch. So there's lots and lots to learn. But there's key times of development. We've talked about adolescence being such a key time of development. And epigenetics, that word means above and beyond the genes. So it's not just the genetics in themselves, what turns on and activates certain genes and what doesn't. So at any rate, what can happen is there can be a disruption in usual brain function. And even if there is a disruption, that might result in no disease. It may result in some signs and symptoms, but not a full-blown disease. Or it may result in a illness or disease, a condition of which one of them could be a mental disorder. Now, the words signs and symptoms always get thrown out together. I think it's really important to notice that signs, when we use the word signs, that's what people can see, something that would be picked up by a video recorder, whereas symptoms is what someone experiences within themselves. So think of the comedian who's making everyone laugh and everyone assumes they're happy, but they may actually really be struggling with depression but not showing that, right? The outward signs might not be there. So a mental disorder, again, if that happens, we also need to think about the cultural factors. So how does their ability to function in their world align with their culture and what they have to face? So that is something to be considered. Now, here's the thing where we get mixed up around facts mattering, because somebody will tell you a story of, well, my Uncle Jack, he worked in an asbestos mine and he, smoked and drank and never ate a green vegetable and he didn't have any disease. Well, lucky Uncle Jack won the genetics lottery, didn't he? Because the environmental factors were all there. Someone else could do everything right and have real serious health conditions. So again, we need to be humble around, we don't always know what's happening, but we do need to know the larger trends and trust the science around figuring things out. I know there was recently in the news a connection around MS, multiple sclerosis, relating it back to the Epstein-Barr syndrome. So science is always changing and learning. Sometimes we've had a little opportunity to learn to up our science literacy as we've all been experiencing COVID and the pandemic. And as you can see, sometimes people like to take shortcuts and try to make assumptions about what's going on and get really frustrated when advice changes. But science is a process. It's an approach. And so it should continue to change because all the time new things are being learned. So the same thing with treatments for mental disorders. there's going to be changes. There's going to be new evolutions and new developments all the time. So some fast facts about mental illnesses. 1 in 5 will have a mental illness. And yet you think about how much stigma there is around that. I would bet if all of us think about it, there's somebody with a mental disorder within our family, within our friends, within our work community. So how sad that there is such stigma about that. Especially because early identification and treatment leads to much better outcomes. When you think about it, we don't want the brain to learn to be ill, right? And especially in those times for children and youth, to get treatment earlier than later is so absolutely important. Now, for the treatments that are there, not every treatment works perfectly. Sometimes it's hard to treat, but the success rate for treatment of a mental illness is about the same as treating any other condition. When you think about it, most conditions are managed. So something like arthritis, for example, or diabetes is a good parallel to how someone may need to manage their mental illness or disorder. So how sad that there's such stigma that will deter many people from accessing treatment. And I just challenge you, even if we think we're quite open and trying to have a positive outlook and an acceptance of mental illness, just think about how would it be easier to call into work and say that one has a migraine or that one has a panic attack as the reason why they can't drive to work. So to me, we have a ways to go in reducing stigma for sure. I have a dear friend whose daughter was hospitalized, and her community and friends brought lots of casseroles and support. And when her other child was hospitalized for mental illness, there wasn't the same type of support at all. And I heard a comedian talk about her experience with a mental illness, struggling with a very major depression. And she said either she had no support come her way or the odd comment to say, perk up. And she said in her funny way, as if I hadn't thought of that, right? So we have to watch and we have to be vigilant, and we do have to be increasing our mental health literacy so that we can reduce stigma. Because here's the thing, increasing our ability to call things what they are and talk about it in ways that's evidence informed does decrease stigma. Because sadly right now, only 20% receive the treatment that's necessary, and it is terribly underfunded compared to other illnesses and the needs that are out there. So the next part that we're going to talk about is links or connections. So words matter, evidence matters, connection matters. So how do we connect with a young person that we're concerned about? Could be our own child, could be another young person that we're supporting. Let's talk about that. And also, what's just kind of usual moodiness or something more serious? When do we really need to tune in and pay closer attention? So this is a graph that we use often to talk about a normal range and intensity of mood. So this is somebody's baseline mood. And of course, some people are more Tiggers going through life. Some people are more Eeyores, but we all kind of have our norm. And even just, going through our days, going through our weeks and months, there's going to be changes in our moods and how we go about our lives. What we need to watch for, is there a real dip in somebody's move down from a baseline mood? That would be a concern. So they might still be able to, laugh at a movie or with some friends, but overall they're really feeling a decrease in their baseline mood. Then that would be a cause for concern that you would need to be inquiring with that person in a respectful way. Talk about what you're noticing, how you're seeing how they're acting, how they're maybe withdrawing, and express concern. So again, look for changes in the behavior of someone, in their attitude, in their appearance, not just a little, blah time where they, lost a little bit of their spunk, but something that's kind of lasting for a bit. And again, ask give them examples of what you're noticing and what you're concerned about. You may want to ask others close to your child. Please do bring it up to the attention of school personnel. What are they seeing of how your child is interacting? The earlier that you can get on stuff like that, the better. Again, it might not be a mental illness, but it might be a mental health problem that they're struggling with and need support with. And again, let them know that there's help with this, that they can be connected to supports. So another big topic that we hear about so much is stress and anxious coping and anxiety and all of that mulled in together. How do we help our children manage stress? We have to understand first a little better about what it is we're talking about. So first of all, there's something called toxic stress. Now that's prolonged and extreme kind of stress caused by huge neglect or abuse, and that is impacting even the development of the brain. And so that I don't want to minimize. That is something that needs, a lot of support. But those are kind of extreme circumstances. What we're usually talking about here is kind of the more stresses of day-to-day life, and even tolerable stress when there's disappointments in life. So that level of mental distress and even some mental health problems fits in this category. So we need to think about our physiology in the brain. Our physiology has, served us well over centuries to run away from saber-toothed tigers and stuff. And our physiology hasn't changed all that much to adapt to the modern day world. So there's danger. We have our sensory perceptions pick it up. The amygdala is going, and other kinds of brain processes initiates all the physiological cascade and helps us fight or flee or freeze or flock. Flock means we check out, hey, did you notice that noise too? Is there something to worry about? So all of that's going on. And then when the danger passes, we relax and our system settles down again. Now, some people have a real trigger that causes them to react even more. I use the example of my mom. In her house, she used to have a smoke alarm that went off every time we used the oven to broil, right? It was a hair trigger alarm that would go off. So that can happen with a state of anxiety. So maybe there's no danger or very little danger, like making toast, but then there's the sensory perception. The brain registers it as a danger. That same initiation happens. And it's a real problem if somebody tries to avoid and withdraw any of those kinds of situations in the future. That's when that really triggers and makes that pattern in the brain more and more for anxious coping. So again, I think it's important. I share this with my students at Mount Royal, because I'm teaching a course now where they have to do presentations, and a lot of them are worried about that. I talk about, we have to have some physiological arousal to get ourselves going. That can help our performance. We need deadlines, for example, to do our taxes, or to show what we've learned. We need a date for an examination or something, or a school for a piano recital, all of that. So we have to find our optimum place where we're in a good place to perform our best. Think about hockey teams. They talk about a team's been off, not playing for long enough, and they can come out flat. On the other side, they might be overly nervous and, too nervous to grip their hockey sticks very well, and they wouldn't be playing as well. So we have to find your optimal place. So there's lots of strategies to pick ourselves up or to calm ourselves down. And that's the kind of stuff that people love to sell to you, right? Buy my app for this and that, for emotional regulation. But truly, you don't have to buy expensive apps to learn some techniques like box breathing and that kind of stuff. So here's the thing. We have to normalize the stress response curve, not make it as something that we have to pathologize. And so we have to help our young people in understanding what's going on when they feel anxious. And so here's the steps to it that's really important. I shared this with my students last night, and they ate it up, right? So at step 1, we need to check our thinking. Are we catastrophizing? Here's the thing. What you say to yourself, your physiological system is going to believe. Here's a little exercise right now, actually. Imagine that you have a lemon, a beautiful lemon that smells so lemony, there's nothing that smells quite like a fresh lemon. And imagine, play along there if you will. Imagine that you're taking a bite and your mouth is full of lemon juice, sour, sour lemon juice that's filling up your mouth. So if you just play along for a minute and imagine all that lemon juice in your mouth. Now I invite you to notice, if you were playing along, if you have more saliva in your mouth. And if you do, isn't that amazing? Because your body, your physiology is trying to always be responding and helping you imagine how to navigate the world. So even pretend lemon juice, there was a connection in your brain that said, salivary gland, you're on. We need more saliva to deal with this lemon juice, right? So our thoughts matter so much around our physiological reaction. So if we can check our thinking and say, is this a helpful thought? Is this a true thought? What's a better thought? Because our first thought is not often our best thought, right? Sometimes we have to get into the habit of checking our thinking and doing some good editing right there. And if we do a good job with correcting our thinking, right? Like, oh no, this is disastrous. I'm going to fail the test. It's like, this is a quiz worth 5% of my final grade. It's going to give me some feedback about how I'm doing and what I need to study. It will not be the end of the world, even if I don't do well. Maybe I'll only get 3 of the 5%. It doesn't, it's not a big deal. Then we're going to have a different physiological reaction. Maybe if we catch our thinking, we're not going to get as highly physiologically aroused. So that's number 1. Number 2 is problem solving. So if we can help our young people develop better problem solving skills, that will also help them in dealing with any anxious thoughts. Because if we know we can manage, we can cope, we can problem solve and build those skills, that's doing them a very good thing, right? So the problem sometimes with us as well-intentioned parents is we problem solve too much for our young people. I knew that I was on my parenting game if I could stop my mouth and sometimes remember. I didn't always do it. I certainly didn't do it perfectly or well even, but if I could stop myself and say, what do you think you should do about that problem? Instead of just telling them, that was much better, right? Because they have to increase their ability to figure out what they need to do and solve problems. I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but I think these kinds of devices has sometimes been resulted in them being an umbilical cord between parent and child, and parents well-meaning solving all their kids' problems in the end doesn't give the child confidence in how they should be figuring things out and managing things. So think about that. Sometimes we just have to think, okay, my husband and I, we have 100+ years of experience. We kind of think sometimes it's obvious what our 23-year-old should do, but sometimes we have to zip it and let them experience what they need to be figuring something out, because that's how they're going to build their confidence and their skills. Okay. And then the last point, so that's the problem solving skills. This is the physiological arousal stuff. Right? So that is, if it's really high, sometimes if we're really, highly aroused physiologically, when I was rear-ended, I wasn't doing my best thinking, right? I had to calm myself down to figure out what I needed to do. And so that's where you hear all the time around deep breathing. That matters, because remember running away that earlier slide about the saber-toothed tiger? If we're doing, that's diaphragmatic breathing. If we're really anxious, we're going to breathe really shallowly. It's called prey breathing, P-R-E-Y, not prayer, but prey breathing, because physiologically we don't want the, animal to hear us breathing. So physiologically we do that. If we take deep breaths, that helps trigger our parasympathetic nervous system to know we're okay, we can calm down. What are we saying to ourselves? Sometimes we need to be moving and doing something. That's also matters. So again, people have different strategies that works for them individually around how to calm themselves. So it's really good to be exploring what works for you and what works for your young person, and to talk with them about different strategies that they can learn to calm themselves down. But here's the problem. This one gets a lot of attention. And again, there's lots of apps and different things, stuff, people wanting to sell you stuff about this. But we don't give enough attention to here, to checking our thinking, and also our problem solving skills. So if these can be strengthened, if you can talk about this with your youth, with your young person, and help them in solving this, then this will be easier to manage. I wish we could have some back and forth talking about this, because I think it's so important. And I will be sure that Claire and Chris and others have some resources from our team to go into this in more detail, including some short animated videos talking about the stress response that could be helpful. So we've talked about how words matter, about how facts and evidence matters, how we need to link with our young person, link with other supports, such as school wellness workers, and then what other steps that we can take. So what steps can we take to boost mental health and promote resiliency? Because again, we don't lose our mental health. There's things that we can actually do. So again, watching the billion-dollar industry that's trying to sell you lots of stuff, what has good evidence behind it that's helpful? So this is a quote from Dr. Tyler Black that I quite like. And he's talking about the pandemic and the response to it. Is it really a tsunami of mental health distress? Or is it an event that disproportionately affected the people we've always failed to protect? So early on, there was a quote from Damien Barr, who did a little write-up, who people said, oh, we're all in the same boat with this pandemic. And he pointed out, we might be in the same storm, but we're in very different boats. Because if you've noticed, the billionaires have managed quite well through the pandemic, whereas others who have really struggled, had pre-existing difficulties, had difficulties at home, maybe with family stressors or inadequate housing, food insecurity. Lots of people have struggled a lot more, and the stresses of the pandemic has exacerbated it. So one steps we can take is advocating for a more just society and for a better healthcare for all, better social safety net for a better society. What we can do individually and influence for others around us. What do we know? What does the science say about what's really helpful for our mental health? These are probably no big surprises for you. And maybe they're even kind of like, yeah, okay, we kind of know that. What's really important to recognize is maybe we kind of skip over this too quickly when it's so important about what we can do to improve our mental health. So exercise. And sometimes the word exercise is such a loaded word for people. Movement teaches our brain that our behavior matters, right? If we can even increase movement in the day, makes a terrific difference. It's sad, the statistics around how few young people get the recommended amount of exercise. It's usually only the people on, or the young people on sports teams and stuff. And so if we can get people moving, it makes a huge difference. I've certainly seen that in my children. Sufficient sleep. We all know if we're sleep deprived, how we feel. And for young people, that this is a tremendously big issue. So watching getting the screens away at least an hour before bed is important. Getting into that routine is so important. Positive supportive relationships. So when we talk about screen time, sometimes I'm asked about, what's the evidence say about that? And I would suggest to you that there's not an easy answer for that. Not all use of screen time or social media is the same. There's some that's a lot more positive and creative and growth supporting than others. An important thing to ask is, when you're off screen time, how do you feel? Do you feel better for it? Or do you feel like you had potato chips instead of a good meal? Sometimes it's not the best kinds of connections. So again, positive supportive relationships, some of them might be online, but hopefully there's some real person-to-person connections that are happening. It's oh so important. Healthy nutrition. Again, really, really important for the brain, for the body, for good functioning. And this last point doesn't get enough attention for the pillars of health, but helping others, feeling like one can make a difference, can have agency. If I'm concerned about others, is there something that I can do? It's good for one's own mental health. It's good for the other. Even the act of seeing others helping makes a difference to our mental well-being. But that's not all. Other things that are important is, again, checking your thinking, your mindset. Am I in a positive mindset that I'm, a growth mindset? Carol Dweck's work is important around that. Don't have to be perfectionistic. Don't have to, get into all or nothing thinking. But how am I framing things for myself? And sharing that with your young people. So they may not copy you around your style of dress per se, or what your favorite TV shows are is different for them, but they will be paying attention to how you're framing even challenges in life, right? Like, so if they're hearing from the adults around them that they're doomed because of the effects of the pandemic on their future studies, that is not a good message, nor is it an accurate message to send out there. What about improving our emotional literacy? Instead of just saying, I'm mad, sad, glad, it matters around increasing our vocabulary around how to describe emotions. Daniel Siegel says, if we can name it, we can tame it, right? So am I feeling perturbed? Am I feeling trepidatious? Help your young people get a whole litany of words to describe how they're feeling. So important. Routine doesn't sound exciting, but it's important for us as adults and also for young people. So lots of times when things go wrong with school personnel, we tell them, hold the ship steady, because routines build in some safety, there's some boundaries, there's a sense of belonging when we can have boundaries. Having said that, it's also okay to shake things up sometimes. Maybe sometime if you've had a rough week, maybe supper is popcorn and a movie and a sense of fun. That's important. I happen to know a family who was struggling with the budget, and they started cleaning out the cupboards. And this friend of mine said they started to do chopped kitchen. Okay, we've got these ingredients. Let's have a little fun, a little contest about what kind of meals we can make out of our pantry ingredients. And they had a great time. And some of the food was edible. And again, keeping one's sense of humor is oh so important. I like that cartoon I came across. I think it's helpful to kind of just shift that thinking again, if we can keep a sense of humor. And also just to keep learning. So on our website, there's Parenting Your Teen, there's Teening Your Parent. There's more information about how to just have more information around even what you can ask your health provider. There's more information about dealing with stress, more information about some common mental disorders. For example, anxiety disorders or ADHD. Lots more learning through Alberta Health Services. This community education services has all kinds of free webinars going on, many a month, on all kinds of topics that you may enjoy. Sometimes you can even register and then watch the recording if the time doesn't work out. CanReach is a resource you can go on that website and find out even primary care doctors that have more experience with mental health for children and adolescents. There's the CHIPS community health team. This is the caregiver series out of Edmonton that has lots of good information. I know I checked with them recently around good information around screen time for families. So lots of good information there, as well as checking with your school personnel and your wellness coach. And I know that you're going to hear more about this in a minute. But just on a personal note, this is an acrylic painting that my daughter did when she was 12, and she suffers from some chronic pain that she even had back then. And so I would suggest to you that life's challenges doesn't always lead to more discord. It can bring out beautiful things. And so even through this challenge of the pandemic, I've hoped you're able to have seen some blessings, and that it's helped you continue to grow. So I thank you for having me this evening, and I hope I gave you a little bit of food for thought. I wish again I could have been meeting with you in person to see your lovely faces and reactions and answer questions, but I hope I did give you some food for thought.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that presentation, your insight, your expertise, your knowledge. I'm positive that anybody that attended tonight can take away some really important information. And just to briefly talk about our Star Catholic Support Pathway, you had mentioned in your Wordle diagram the word links. And so I just wanted to briefly explain some of the links that we have here at Star Catholic and explain them a little bit more. First and foremost, we understand that parenting can be challenging at times. And so we want you to know you don't have to navigate this by yourself, and we're here to help you and walk alongside of you in this journey. The first point of contact should always be with school staff. Just like Kathy had mentioned, maybe it's an email to your teacher or a phone message that they can call you back on, just to connect and see if they are identifying or if you have any concerns with your child in the school. Also, just to bring awareness to, do you need assistance with academic supports, mental health supports, well-being supports, or do you need some more very specialized connection to community assistance? So just bring that awareness too when you're reaching out to the school personnel. It'll just help streamline the process. School-based team supports, this should always be your first point of contact, is reaching out to your teacher first and foremost. It could also include a team of a family school liaison worker, maybe a school counselor, an administrator, learning support facilitator. Every school supports vary from site to site, but collaboration is always best practice. And we're here not to work in silos, but to help build a team around you and your family and your students. Central Office Specialized Supports, that's myself, Michelle Horbe. I'm the Division Wellness Coordinator. We have a Director of Student Services, Chris Pirro, and Director of Faith, Life, and Religious Education, Claire Ganton. And so I just wanted to briefly talk about our pathway. Here's another quick snapshot. Parents talk to school staff, teacher, and how that team might look at a school, and then a central office level of supports here at Star Catholic. First and foremost, we believe in connection and relationships and wrapping around you and your families. So thank you very much for attending, and thank you for Kathy for a fabulous presentation.
Yes, thanks, Michelle. And thanks to all of our families, parents, guardians for attending and for making our kids' mental health a priority. We'll be sending out a survey to parents and guardians to discuss future topics of interest regarding mental health. So look for that in your inbox. We hope to tailor our presentations in the future to what you believe your needs are. And thank you to Kathy for sharing her wisdom and her expertise and for helping us all to become more literate in mental health. We're very grateful to have her as an ally and a partner in supporting student mental health. And again, another plug for Bell Let's Talk Day. Make sure to tweet or Facebook post or whatever you do. TikTok, that's not me, that's for sure. And use the hashtag Bell Let's Talk. So thank you very much again for attending, and have a wonderful evening. Many blessings.